So in order to understand the diversity of plants on Earth, we have to be able to classify them. And using skills that we've developed in previous coursework, you should be able to fill out this data matrix, um, starting with chlorophyll A and B, something we didn't talk about, but I've done this one for you. Protected embryo is something that you're not going to find in algae, but you will find in everything that's considered part of the plant kingdom. Sporophyte dominant, not something you see here, not something you see here, but the big dominant part of a fern is a sporophyte. Same thing with gymnosperm, same thing with angiosperm. Vascular tissue, no, not in a moss either, but here you do find it. Swimming sperm, oops, that's a 1, 1, 1. And then seed plants have evolved pollen. They no longer need the swimming sperm. So this is also a 3. Roots and leaves, so true roots and true leaves, not in that group, not in this group. You only have true roots and leaves in groups that have vascular tissue. Seeds, even the ferns that are vascular plants don't have seeds, but gymnosperms and angiosperms do. Pollen, only the groups with seeds have pollen. And then flowers, of course, that is a derived trait only of the angiosperms, and cones is a trait that we only see in certain members of the gymnosperms. So you should be able to then map these out onto a cladogram. And just to get you started, down here you could have chlorophyll A and B, let's say. So let's draw a line. Chlorophyll A and B. Let's go back to the data table here. Protected embryo. So let's just say, actually, let's just we could draw the mosses on, or the algae on, as an outgroup here. Let's go ahead and put algae here, and then right here we can put protected embryo. Okay, and then let's see what's next on the cladogram. Sporophyte dominant. We can come back to those. Vascular tissue. Well, let's do sporophyte dominant right here. Oops. Okay, so this is going to be your moss. This will be our fern. And we can make this angiosperm or gymnosperm. Angiosperm. And we'll make this one gymnosperm. So we're going to have flowers here. Cones here. We're going to have seeds somewhere along here. Vascular tissue down here. You would also put pollen down here as well. So on and so forth. Let's see if there's any major ones we left off. Swimming sperm. Let's go ahead and do roots, leaves, and swimming sperm. So swimming sperm is a trait that you find at the base of the tree. But once pollen evolves up here, sperm no longer swim. And true roots and leaves is found right here along with vascular tissue. So it's pretty easy to map these traits out on a cladogram if you know what you're doing. So talking about the structure of plants is important to understand their evolution as well as their reproductive success. So The first organ to emerge from a seed, so let's skip right up to seed plants, is the root. It pops out of the seed, grows into the earth, holds the seed in place, and allows the embryo to start absorbing water and nutrients. Roots grow by mitosis at a site called the root apical meristem. And what these sites are basically sites of mitosis. So a root is shaped kind of like that, and there's a region towards the end that divides by mitosis, allowing the root to get longer and longer and longer. In this diagram, we can see a root growing. This area that's kind of circled in here, this is the root apical meristem. That's where mitosis is happening, and then as the root elongates, the older cells mature into mature tissues. So there are stem cells shown here in gray, producing all of these new cells that then develop into the tissues of the root. Also notice up towards the top, these epidermal cells elongate into root hairs, which increase the surface area of the root. So it's down here in the tip of the root where mitosis is taking place. That's where you actually saw cells dividing by mitosis if you took Bio 1 here. And you'll see it again when you take genetics. So root hairs are elongated epidermal cells. They allow increased surface area for the absorption of water. And also, plants will have a relationship, a symbiotic relationship with fungal hyphae that increase their surface area as well. So you'll have the root, and you have root hairs on the root, but then you'll also have fungal hyphae growing through and into root cells and extending off into the soil, increasing the surface area of that root. And those fungi receive nutrients from the plant, but they allow the plant to absorb minerals and water from the soil. The two major kinds of roots that you'll see are tap roots, in which case you have a great big long sturdy root like this with side roots branching off of it. You'll see that in a lot of your trees, a lot of your well, all kinds of plants have that. But your grasses and related plants will have a fibrous root system, whereas all the roots are about the same size, but they branch out like crazy. And fibrous root systems are really good for holding soil in place to control erosion. Tap roots are good at growing in drier soils, perhaps where the water's further down below the soil. The functions of a root are fairly obvious. They hold the plant to the ground, they help it to absorb water and minerals, and they store carbohydrates. Remember, carbohydrates are produced when CO2 from the atmosphere is stuck together through the process of photosynthesis. There's all kinds of types of roots, which you can learn if you take one of the plant courses on campus, but we'll just show you some examples. You don't need to memorize them. Now, stems are a little more complicated. They elongate at the tips as well. At the tip of a plant stem, you'll have a region. Let me see if I can kind of draw it. This is going to be a little clumsy, but that's okay. Oh, stop it. Okay, let's see here. Anyway, this is the tip of our stem. Right up here in this area is the shoot apical meristem, or I'll abbreviate it as SAM. That is where mitosis is taking place. And these big things I've drawn are young leaves. So the youngest leaves are near the tip of the stem. Older leaves are down here. And there's also buds in here. Buds are also shoot apical meristems. These buds on the side, they're just sites of mitosis that are dormant, basically. So plants elongate by mitosis at the shoot apical meristem. So there's a main shoot apical meristem that's functional at the end of the branch. These ones on the sides that we call either lateral buds or axillary buds, as we call them on the slide here. These are found in the axils of leaves, so found in this angle between the leaf and the stem. You'll find a bud right there. Those are usually dormant. So they contain a shoot apical meristem, but they're normally dormant until they're told to turn on. If they're told to turn on, they grow into a new branch, or they might grow into a flower. So the structure of a branch is basically, you could draw a real basic one. You could draw a branch, it's just a stick. There's the end up here where elongation takes place with the shoot apical meristem, and then you have you have leaves attached. Let's draw a real simple leaf like that, and we'll draw another one down here like that, so on and so forth. The areas where leaves attached are known as nodes, and the areas between the leaves are known as internodes. And right here in the axils of the leaf is where you'll find your axillary buds. These are dormant branches or flowers that will probably not grow until the next year. So here we can see this again. We have a terminal bud, or what we've called the apical bud. This is the major bud that's responsible for growing, elongating this twig through the process of primary growth, which is elongation. Roots and twigs do primary growth as they get longer and longer. They also have leaves, so the leaves are attached. So we use the word shoot to refer to the stem and the leaves at the same time. So this is the stem, these are the attached leaves, here are the buds, the axillary buds. They use slightly different terminology in this picture. We call them axillary buds and apical bud in the other slide. So the buds are just an apical meristem where mitosis takes place, and it's protected by really little leaves basically, and that's all a bud is. Stems can also be used for storage, and in some plants they're green and they photosynthesize. Some stems grow underground, like the ginger root, is actually an underground stem. Potatoes are an underground stem. Lots of different kinds of stems out there. But no matter what kind of stem you are, on the end you have an apical meristem. So right here, shoot apical meristem, this is where mitosis happens. On the edge of that we have new organs being produced. We have leaves being made. So here's some young leaves, here's some older leaves way down here. This is a great big older leaf. And right here in the axis of the leaf is a young bud that could eventually grow into its own branch someday. Plants also can be complicated because in some groups, like the trees, they have secondary growth. Which is when you don't just grow up and down, but you grow side to side. You increase your girth as well. You get bigger in diameter. And there's also a meristem associated with this. It's called the vascular cambium, and it is basically a ring on the inside of the tree. It's a ring of tissue where mitosis can take place. Basically, it's a ring of stem cells, and to the inside, it divides over and over again by mitosis, making secondary xylem. And to the outside, it divides over and over and over again, making secondary phloem. You should know what those tissues do already. One carries water, one carries sugars. And that's the wood that you think of with a tree is secondary xylem. And phloem is part of the bark, and it transports sugars, of course. And what's kind of neat is every year, let's say the vascular cambium in this drawing is right here. So it's also producing phloem out this way, but it's producing xylem this way. These bigger cells were produced in the spring. They carry water, and there's a lot more water usually in the spring with a lot of rainfall. These smaller cells were produced in the summer. So these are from last summer, and this is from perhaps summer right now. Let's say this tree's growing in summer. These are the newest cells that were produced. And this pairing of big cells right next to little cells, those made in spring and those made in summer, is what creates the rings that we see when we look at a tree in cross section. So we can tell how old a tree is by how many summers it's survived. And we can see that in this diagram. Here's the vascular cambium. Remember, this is where mitosis happens. Mitosis happens here. It's producing xylem this way, and it's making phloem that way. Phloem is part of the bark, so secondary phloem right here, part of the bark, and then the xylem is the wood. And the growth rings are simply those big cells lined up right next to little cells, making a ring visible to the naked eye. Now, the other organ that we want to discuss then, also produced by the shoot apical meristem, are leaves, and they are the sites of gas exchange. This is where photosynthesis happens and gas exchange for the plant. This is how we make our sugars. This example here is actually poison ivy. Leaves can be simple or they can be compound. So if you look at a branch and there's a leaf coming off of it, here's the bud that's in the axil of the leaf. Wherever there's a bud, you have a leaf here. So a simple leaf would be like this. A compound leaf, here's the stem, here's the leaf, here's the bud, but it might look like it's actually composed of a bunch of leaves, I should say. But in fact, this whole thing in this case is a single compound leaf. For every bud, there's only one leaf. So there's a bud here, and then this big structure. This big structure is a leaf. There's no bud, right here and right here. That doesn't exist on this. So this whole thing is a single leaf. So leaves can be modified in many ways. In cacti, the stem does the photosynthesis while the leaves are the spines. In other plants, like in pea plants, they become tendrils to allow plants to climb. In onions, the leaves store things. So an onion is a good example of a great big bud. You basically have a little piece of stem and a whole bunch of leaves coming up that overlap one another. All the layers of the onion are storage leaves that overlap one another in this kind of closed bud that's not currently elongating. So the stem's right here basically, and the shoot apical meristem's right around here, and all of these things coming off are leaves. Now leaf structure is fairly complex. We can talk about it more later, but there are veins inside composed of xylem and phloem, as you can see here, and then there are different tissues that contain chloroplasts that enable photosynthesis, and also these organs called stomata that allow for gas exchange. So CO2 can come into the plant and oxygen can come back out through these pores. Another thing that comes out of these pores, as we'll discuss in a later chapter, is water. Oops, that's supposed to be H2O. Okay. So all of these organs are connected through the vascular system, the xylem and phloem. The leaves plug into the stem, and the stem plugs into the roots. So moving down the stem, we're going to have our sugars made by photosynthesis. Moving up the stem is going to be your water from the roots and minerals from the soil, and they are all interconnected. So if we look at this all at once, we can see this plant. It has the upper shoot system here is a series of repeating segments. So you have at the very tip your apical bud. That's where your shoot apical meristem is. And then you have leaves coming off below it. The youngest leaves are up here, the older leaves are down here, and every leaf has a bud in the axis. So basically in the corner between the leaf and the stem is a bud. And those buds can grow, as we see right here, into a new branch. And then that branch will have its own leaves and its own bud. So it's the same basic structure as the main branch here. These repeating units of nodes and internodes. Areas with leaves and areas between leaves are the internodes. And as we move down, we go into the root. So down here at the tips of these rootlets is where you would find those root apical meristems. So the roots are growing down through primary growth. The shoot is growing up through primary growth, and the buds then are branching or growing into new flowers in this case. We can see this same pattern when we look at a stem with no leaves on it, like in the winter or fall. We can see the buds up here, usually protected by vestigial leaves. These scales protect the apical meristem that's inside, that's dormant right now. There's also little apical meristems inside these axillary buds. So originally there would have been a leaf attached right here, and that leaf had a bud in its axil, but the leaf has fallen off, leaving scars. You can see leaf scars when you look at leaves in the winter. And down here is a bud scar. This is how long the twig was last year, and it has grown up to this point since the last year. So you can see all of this while looking at a twig. Here's a branch. This branch used to be a bud. There used to be a leaf attached right here, and then there was a bud right here, but that bud has divided by mitosis to form a branch. So all of this is clear when you look at the branches in the wintertime when all the leaves have fallen off. These repeating units of nodes and internodes. Nodes contain leaves, and you can see the buds in the axil of the leaf, and the internodes are the elongated areas between the leaves. Now when you look at those nodes, you might see different kinds of leaves. I already mentioned you can find compound leaves, and we'll ignore this one for right now, but the two major kinds of compound leaves are pinnately compound leaves, where you have kind of this feather-like arrangement, and palmately compound leaves, where everything comes out of a central area like the palm of a hand. And you can see right here at the axis there's a single bud here, and there's a single bud here, as well as here. These are two kinds of pinnately compound leaves. This is a palmately compound leaf. So a lot of plants have simple leaves where you have a bud and a leaf, and there's just one blade to that leaf. But these have little leaflets, as we would call them, segmentation to their leaves. The other thing to keep in mind when you're looking at plants is the arrangement of their leaves. So how many leaves per node? So let's not worry about whorled, which is multiple leaves per node, but the more common types are this type and this type here. Alternate leaves have one leaf per node, and opposite plants have two per node, whereas whorled might have more than two per node. A lot of plants are one or the other. A lot of the plants in Arkansas are alternate, but some are opposite, and knowing which are which, it makes it a lot easier to identify plants when you're out in the field. So some of the more common plants in the area are gymnosperms, like pine, which have needle-like leaves, making them very easy to identify. Oaks, which are very common in Arkansas, they have alternate leaves that are simple. Here's a twig from an oak in previous years. You can see the leaf scar right here. They produce acorns, and one easy way to identify them in the winter or the fall is the end buds here. The terminal buds, or the apical bud, is clustered. There's a bunch of them clustered together instead of just one at the end of the branch. And they make leaves like this, or like this water oak over here, very common on campus. You'll see them all over the place. Maple trees are another common tree on campus. They have opposite leaves, so they would have a leaf coming off the branch here and another one on the opposite side here, and each one would have its own bud. And they make these helicopter-like fruits that a lot of people are familiar with, and very familiar looking leaves. Think of the flag of Canada. It has a maple leaf on it. So there's all kinds of plants on campus, but they all display these patterns of growth. Apical growth from the shoot apical meristem, which is part of the bud on the end of the branch. They grow outward. They grow in girth by secondary growth, thanks to the vascular cambium. And then the roots elongate through the root apical meristems, producing the plants that we see outside all over campus and are about to bloom when I'm recording this lecture in the spring.